California residents in mass panic after who they're letting out of prison early. They asked for it. People don't want to go outside anymore by Frank Lee for freedomdaily.com. California residents are having a tough time with what could be happening based on a 2-year-old ballot known as Proposition 57. It was voted on in 2016, but people may not have realized the seriousness at the time. When they're just putting ballots in a box or pressing buttons on a voting machine, then the reality of the dire situation they just entered themselves into is much more difficult to accept. Voters were in favor of Proposition 57 a few years ago, are probably in deep regret and panic over what might happen. Proposition 57 will allow the early release of some non-violent criminals to help alleviate the overcrowding in California prisons. When you think about this out loud or on paper, then you might think that means people who stole from their job, or maybe a petty small-time drug dealer, or some silly college student who was caught doing something stupid at school. But then people realized who this encompasses, and it's absolutely repulsive. California voters under the Democratic rule of Governor Jerry Brown could be releasing 10,000 sex offenders to the public. Can you imagine 10,000 sex offenders roaming the streets of your neighborhood? Would you ever let your children outside again? Conservative Tribune posted this about Prop 57. In a bid to reduce overcrowding in state prisons, California voters in 2016 approved a ballot measure known as Proposition 57, which allows for the early parole release of supposedly non-violent offenders. That means individuals convicted of offenses such as incest, pimping minors into prostitution, and possession of child pornography may soon be free to walk among the public again. The Los Angeles Times reported that Sacramento Superior Court Judge Alan Sumner issued a preliminary order on Friday to California state prison officials, which ordered them to rewrite their regulations stemming from Prop 57. The state argued that language with Prop 57 gave officials broad discretion to include or exclude any class of offenders from consideration for early parole, but Judge Sumner disagreed and thought the state had gone too far in specifically excluding nonviolent sex offenders. If the voters had intended to exclude all registered sex offenders from early parole consideration under Proposition 57, they presumably would have said no, Sumner stated. He stated further that the Corrections Department could only exclude violent sex offenders from early parole and ordered the department to more accurately define what constituted a violent sexual offense. On top of that, he also stated that sexual offenders who had already served time for their crimes, even violent ones, but were in prison on an unrelated nonviolent offense, must be included in the early parole consideration process. Judge Sumner called for the department to further define what clarifies as a violent sexual offense. Some readers may ask if it matters if the sexual crime is considered violent. If it harms a person physically, then it should be regarded as violent. There should be very defined language that determines what constitutes as a violent crime. But one must consider that sexual offenses are some of the most horrendous, and perhaps sexual predators should not be granted early release. Can you imagine what it would be like if 10,000 sex offenders were released and wandered the neighborhoods looking for work, a place to live, and perhaps the next victim? Is Judge Sumner favoring sexual offenders, some of whom have physically and mentally harmed children. It should be very concerning that a judge is appearing to be in favor of releasing violent sexual offenders. Conservative Tribune also reported that California no longer considers raping a drugged person who is passed out as a violent offense. It's still rape, but according to Californians, it's a peaceful rape. The thinking behind the California mindset is often very disturbing. If people rape a person who is passed out, then that's exceptionally horrifying and should not be considered nonviolent. Just because someone is sleeping or passed out, that's not considered violent. The level of thinking is unfathomable. Sorry about that. Until they figure something else out, they have to consider anybody convicted of a nonviolent offense, even if it was a sex offense. Bellucci told reporters outside the courtroom, "We believe we've won a battle, but the war continues." It is worth noting that in addition to those convicted of incest, pimping a minor, or possessing child pornography, the state will now be required to consider early release for those individuals convicted of offenses like indecent exposure, intimately touching an unlawfully restrained person, or even raping a drugged or unconscious victim, which is now inconceivably no longer considered a violent crime by the state of California. The most significant problem that comes with overcrowded prisons is finding a way to convince everyone to follow the law. Why are so many people in California breaking the law? Why are there 10,000 sexual offenders in California? Is there something in the water? You gotta ask yourself, is there something in the water? The mentality, they have dragged California through the mud, and I'm not sure if the law-abiding citizens are going to favor this kind of a release of 10,000 sexual offenders. Can you imagine releasing 10,000 sexual offenders all at once, basically? What's going on there? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It is. Now that's a crap hole, right? That's a crap hole state, actually. Unbelievable. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And again, thank you so much for watching.